All right, welcome back to episode 2 of the All American Hoops podcast. I'm your host, Chris Driscoll, and it's been a couple weeks since I recorded episode 1. I had a ton of fun doing that. In that episode, I basically just talked about what the podcast is going to be about. I gave a little bit of my take on the in-season tournament, and since then, the in-season tournament has come and gone, and now I'm just going to give my take on the tournament. But before I start that, I know at the end of last episode I said that I'm hoping that I wouldn't be recording episode 2 alone. That's not going to happen this time around. Was going to do it with my two brothers, John and Matt, but all three of us have been pretty busy, and it was pretty tough for us to find a time with all three of us being available because both of them are taking college classes right now, and it's the end of the semester where they have finals now. So both of them will be home on Friday, and we're hoping that in the next month or so, we're going to get a couple episodes in together, and that's going to be a great time. But for now, just for this episode, hopefully it'll be just me giving my takes. And yeah, so today's episode, we'll just talk about my takes in the in-season tournament, how it went, what changes I would make, and then also by the end of it, since people are talking about LeBron's legacy after the tournament, I'm also going to talk about my top 10 because, as I mentioned in episode 1, I do love basketball history. I'm a big basketball history nerd. And I can't go too many episodes without you guys not knowing my top 10 players all time. So, all right. So, if you're watching this podcast, I'm assuming you're a basketball fan. But if you're not, and you've been living under a rock the past couple of days, the Lakers won the in-season tournament. That was the first one of all time. Adam Silver introduced the tournament. It was very unpopular at first. And I think part of the reason is because when people hear new ideas and they don't hear the details, it's kind of tough to get on board with it because me personally, when I heard the idea of an in-season tournament, I didn't really think about it being mixed into the regular season schedule. And if I'm not mistaken, I feel like most people agreed with me where I said, what are the stakes? Why are people going to be playing meaningless games? And these weren't really meaningless games because they do count towards the regular season. And even though they do count towards the regular season, it felt like a lot of those games were just completely separate from the regular season. And it almost felt like it was more important than any other regular season game, which was pretty cool to watch. So I'm usually the first one to call Adam Silver out on his BS. I don't think he's a good commissioner at all. I think he has his fair share of mistakes. I think he gets a little too political at times. I feel like he's the opposite of Rob Manfred in the MLB, where Rob Manfred doesn't really care about the sports and only sides with the owners. Doesn't really care about the players. Where I also feel like Adam Silver is just the complete opposite. He caves into the players' demands a little too often. The past year or so, he started to back away from that, cracking down on load management with the award minimums and anything. But this whole in-season tournament idea has been great. I'm still very anti-play-in tournament for the playoffs, but I know I'm probably in the minority for that. But the in-season tournament, as much as people want to complain about it, which there are some valid concerns, which I am going to address, I think the in-season tournament was a success, and I don't see it going anytime soon because basically I have a list of pros and cons here, and the number one pro, the players care about it. And when you have players bought into something, it makes the game so much better. You're trying to sell the products, and I think Darvin Ham even mentioned it. As much as we like to say, players go out and give their all every single night, and I think that the average casual NBA fan, and I know it may sound like an insult when I say casual, but I'm saying that as people who don't really watch the NBA a ton but still consider themselves fans. I know they say they don't watch anymore because they don't play defense, they don't really try hard, which I think some of that's over exaggerated. But to every narrative, there is at least some truth to it, and there is some truth to the idea that some NBA players have been taking the regular season less seriously. Like, granted, majority of the NBA Finals teams end up being a top three seed in their respective conference. The Miami Heat making the finals as an 8 seed. It doesn't happen every year. But at the end of the day, not all players work their butts off in the regular season. Am I asking them to go out and give their all every single night? No, you can't be like Russell Westbrook in 2017, where you're going all out and then you're out of gas by Game 5 of the first round. But seeing them have some sort of incentive, that was pretty cool. And part of the incentive was the 500K, but I honestly think it was more than that, because I know that's not all the players. Like, obviously, LeBron and AD, they're like multimillionaires at this point. I know they're end of the world and they're end of the bench players. They're obviously they're like early millionaires at this point, but still, 500K is 500K, and you're not going to turn away free money if you're going to do what you love. It's not like players are just going to scoff at the idea of saying, "Oh, I already have that much money." And I was someone who thought they're not going to care about this, but they care, and it's really cool to see. So yeah, like, big picture, it was a huge success. But obviously, with everything positive, there comes a negative. So I'll talk about some of the cons, but then also I'll talk about another positive in addition to that. So one of the cons, and I think the team that was most negatively affected by this was the Knicks, and that's the scheduling. Because the groups are grouped by how the teams were seeded last year. After the team advances, it felt like I don't know what the specific format was, but after the teams advanced to the to the quarterfinals, they kind of randomized the rest of the regular season playing time. The New York Knicks had the Celtics in their group, I believe. Yeah, they did. And then they had to they had to play the Bucks in the quarterfinals, lost, and then the Celtics lost, and the Celtics lost to the Pacers as well. So then the Knicks and the Celtics played each other after, like, when if they won, they would have played each other in the semifinals. The Knicks are a good team. They're not a great team. They're a playoff team, I'd say. I'd say the Celtics, the Bucks, the Magic are the only teams that are objectively better than them. So the Knicks I would say they're in between a 5 and an 8 seed, or like the 58th best team in the league. They had to play the Bucks in the semifinals or the quarterfinals, and then the Celtics after that. They have to play the Celtics 2 more times after this year. That feels like a little much for the Knicks. The fact they had to play the Bucks and the Celtics and some of the other teams don't really play many great teams at all. It feels weird that the scheduling still isn't equal after the in-season tournament, because everyone plays 82 games. And that's great. But it feels like you should play your teams in your division a little more than the teams in conference, and then the teams in your conference a little more than teams out of conference. That's how it should be. Just a little more. But when you have the Knicks playing the Celtics and the Bucks more, that doesn't sit well with me. And coming from someone who doesn't like the Knicks at all, I'm obviously wearing the Celtics hat. I'm not a big Knicks fan at all. But it's not really fair that they have to play the bigger teams. So that's one of my bigger critiques, is that scheduling is still a little hairy, in my opinion. But that being said, I still think the NBA handled that pretty well. They had like a laid out time for the play-in tournament. They had like a laid out time for games that would happen when the play-in tournament wasn't happening. So I think that was pretty good. One more thing I would actually say is that I don't know. I know that some people were saying that they should make another play-in tournament. Do I keep on saying play-in tournament? But another in-season tournament in the spring. I don't know how that'd work. I don't know how much more money it would be. I don't know how much more the players would buy into it. Maybe it's something that they look into. I don't know. But I definitely think this one is here to stay. But as far as it goes for, if we didn't add one more thing, I do think that they should push off the in-season tournament a month. closer to the All-Star break, because it felt a little weird to have like an in-season tournament just a couple weeks into the season. I feel like the point of an in-season tournament would be in the middle of the season. This isn't. It feels like we should start like this is a quarter into the season and we already have an in-season tournament. It would have been better had it been like at about the halfway point of the season to claim the winner of the in-season tournament. That's my opinion, though. Unless that's their part of their plan to make another in-season tournament coming up next year. I don't know, but I don't. Yeah, maybe you guys disagree, and if you do disagree, I definitely want you to comment on any of my social media posts about that. But that's what I think. But yeah, basically just the pros, the players care, and it just makes it's better basketball. And as much as people like to complain about any type of change, this was pretty cool. But one more con: the courts. Just play on regular basketball courts. You don't need to milk every single thing. The in-season tournament is very cool. Put like an extra logo somewhere. Don't color the entire court. It's not cool. I'm not an artsy guy, so maybe people disagree with me, but just play on regular courts. I don't think that's too much to ask, because I do think that someone's going to get hurt, and they got rid of the big trophy inside the at the half court mark during the finals because people started slipping more, and I think that's going to it didn't happen this year, or did to an extent, but no one got too hurt. So, but I hope they get rid of it next year, but probably not. But yeah, but I also wanted to talk about a couple of other feedback. Bill Simmons, who is basically just a basketball historian, wrote the book of basketball. I actually probably have it with me right here. Do I have? Oh, I did. So you may have seen this book before. It's Bill Simmons, the book of basketball. It's this big. You should read his book when you can. It's a great book, especially if you want to get to know the history of basketball. But he's a big Celtics fan, so he can be pretty biased sometimes. But that being said, he's very critical of them as well. So it's not like it's just a big time homer. But he had some feedback on it, and I wrote them down. And I wanted to see. I'm going to give my feedback. I also want to see what you guys think about it as well. So the current tournament setup is 6 groups of 5. He wants it to be 5 groups of 6. He didn't clarify in his tweet. Maybe you're clarifying in his podcast. I didn't listen to it, but I'm thinking maybe he means 5 teams advance and then the 3 wildcards advance too. I don't know much of a difference that would make, but maybe he wants to do more of a pool play, because when you have 5 teams and you're only playing 4 games as a pool play, that's not really too big of a sample size. 5 games is a slightly bigger sample size, and I do think that could make a big difference. So maybe that's his thought process. But yeah, I don't think that's outrageous, and I also don't think it's outrageous, but I also don't think it's too essential. So yeah, let me know what you think about that. But another one that he said was the first tiebreaker is based on quarters won, not based on point differential. And this I can 100% get on board with, because point differential is important and everything. But I think it's important to be consistent, playing consistently. And it's tough because I'm looking back to the 2022 Eastern Conference Finals when the Celtics won like 75% of the series, but the Celtics only won in 7 games. I would have liked this tiebreaker, but I know some people disagree and say, no, you got to do it based on point differential, and that's it. And I get that. But in a system like this where you're going to be using point differential, that could cause for too much running up scores, which you found the Celtics did against the Bulls. But then his second tiebreaker would be after the amount of quarters won would be the point differential, but capped at 25 points. Again, something I get one with. If you lose by 45 in one game and then only win by 1 3 other times, that's you're sort of like a negative something in that, and that's kind of ridiculous. So yeah, that I 100% agree with. He also wants to change the times of the games to, what do you say, 4 p.m. Pacific. I guess that's fine. It'd be 7 p.m. Eastern then. Sure. Yeah. I live on the East Coast. Sure most people watching this podcast now are on the East Coast as well. Besides Matt McCann, shout out Matt McCann. But yeah, like, I don't have a too big of a problem with the way the schedule is worked out right now. But yeah, Bill Simmons feels otherwise. I'm pretty sure he lives in LA too, so maybe he feels that way too. Maybe that's why he feels that way. So yeah, but yeah, that those are the thoughts of the in-season tournament as a whole. I guess now I'll just talk about the Lakers as well. The Lakers are going to be an interesting team. I think they're not as good as the in-season tournament champions. Like when you would hear in-season tournament champions, you would think they're the best team up until now. Everyone knows they're not the best team in the league yet, or if they will be ever, we don't know. Maybe they could be one day if LeBron and AD stay healthy. Who knows? But they're also not as bad as the record indicates. They're like around the 500 mark. They're around like the 6, 7, 8 seed. I should look that up actually. But they're about average. But in the last few games, they've been very, very good. When you have AD, who I think is the best defender in the league, and then LeBron, who seems to be refusing to age, there's not much you can do to stop that. And their role players are pretty good. Austin Reeves is a much better player than I thought he was. He's a little inconsistent, but he played fantastic in the championship game. Cam Reddish, who I thought was a bust, is playing great. And they got some good other role players as well. Rui Hachimura is a great player. They're a good team. I don't know if they're as good as the Nuggets. I don't know if they're as good as the Suns, the Bucks, the Celtics, the Sixers. I don't know. But I know their ceiling is championship. I think their floor is first round exit. So a pretty low floor and a pretty high ceiling. If LeBron or AD gets injured, they could miss the playoffs. But I'm not going to say they're going to get. I'm not going to predict that though. Yeah, but they could win the championship. But who knows? But anyway, with all of this, people started to question. Okay, anything happens to LeBron, whether it's positive or negative, here's the big question. And if I had the technology, it would be big letters across. How does this affect LeBron's legacy? And some people are answering it seriously, and I'm going to answer it seriously too. It doesn't. The in-season tournament is brand new. It's the first time anyone did anything and LeBron is the first in-season tournament MVP ever. It's cool. It's a very cool accomplishment, and 40 years from now, it's going to look very important because LeBron James is the first one to ever do it. Something that's brand new in the middle of the season, I don't think affects LeBron's legacy that much. And even if it did, it's LeBron James, and nothing he does at this point can affect his legacy that much. Allow me to explain. And I will explain later, because now I'm going to do my top 10 players of all time. And I'm going to do 10 to 1. So, before I do that, a little backstory. I mentioned my first podcast, I made a top 100 list. I believe it was summer of 22. I released my top 75 players of all time. And then I made some edits after last year to where I expanded it to my top 100. Today I'm only going to do top 10. I released my top 100 on both my TikTok and my Twitter. I've given explanations on a few of them. And probably since then, I've changed my mind on things. And I also think I would be constantly changing my mind because that's what humans do. I'm very stern in my top 10, pretty stern in my top 20 as well. But outside of that, there's definitely some room for improvement, especially with players like Giannis, Jokic, Luka, Tatum. Those guys are getting there. They're not. Tatum and Luka aren't close to the top 20 yet, but they'll get there. But for now, I'm just going to talk about my top 10 and give like a minute or so description on each player. So, I think the 10th greatest basketball player of all time is Steph Curry. What's there to say about Steph? He's the greatest three-point shooter of all time. He's probably top 5 ball handler of all time. In my opinion, one of the easiest players to build around because he's such a great shooter and he can move with it. Probably the best off-ball player of all time. And I think that 2016 is one of the best seasons of all time. Had he won that championship ring, he'd have a top 5-ish argument, and I don't think that's an exaggeration at all. But 2-time MVP, one of those is unanimous. 4-time championship, finally won his Finals MVP in 2022, even though he definitely deserved it in 2015. But there's not many players that impacted the game like Steph Curry, and I think he's the 10th greatest basketball player of all time. The 9th greatest basketball player of all time, and I know a lot of people disagree with this. They think he's way too low, but I have Kobe Bryant. Black Mamba mentality, 5-time champion, 2-time Finals MVP, won the MVP in 2008. There's not much to criticize Kobe for, but people don't realize that 9 is a very small number, and to say there were only 8 basketball players better than you all time, that's a massive compliment. People think he's 1, 2, or 3. I think that's outrageous, but Kobe Bryant is fantastic. He's extremely clutch. I know that a lot of the last second shots in the playoffs, that's a very small sample size. They suggest that he's less clutch, but he has a good amount of buzzer beaters in the regular season. And basically, anytime he had the ball, people talk about Steph's gravity. Kobe was even though he was the one taking the last shots, he drew a ton of defenders towards him, and I don't really evaluate my rankings based on what other players think, but the fact that most players have Kobe in the top 5, that does say a lot about the player, and especially the competitor he is. The 9th best basketball player of all time, Kobe Bryant. The 8th best basketball player of all time is Kobe's teammate Shaquille O'Neal. 4-time champion, 3-time Finals MVP, won the MVP in 2000. In my opinion, one of, if the most unstoppable force of all time. Shaq was just unreal. Nick Wright makes the argument that even though he thinks LeBron is the GOAT, that Shaq in those 3 years that in the three-peat is like the single greatest peak of all time. He was just unreal. Again, I brought up gravity with Steph and Kobe, but give Shaq the ball in the paint. There are at least 2 or 3 other defenders collapsing on him, leaving for open shots. But that didn't really matter though, because Shaq could still back down all those defenders and the slam on them. That's the type of player that Shaq was. He was just unbelievable, and people talk about him today, but it still feels like that he's not really talked about, because when people talk about the GOAT conversation, Shaq is literally never mentioned. And I'm not saying that he belongs there, but he might have a top 5 peak. I think that LeBron and MJ are the only 2 ones that objectively have a better peak than him. Shaq, the 8th best basketball player of all time. The 7th best basketball player of all time is another player in that era, and that's Tim Duncan. I think that Tim Duncan is the best defender of all time post the merger, like post the Bill Russell era. Not only that, just the fact that he was someone who he was a player that he was like the centerpiece of a dynasty without any type of superstars around him. Tony Parker, Manu Ginobili, great players. Where would they be without Tim Duncan? They'd be. I had both of them in my top 100. I know that Aaron Schroeder and Nathan Schwartz, I think they had the both of them were like in like the late 100s because of their lack of success as number 1 options. But I think that's pretty unfair because they didn't really have a big enough sample size for that. But ask yourself this: where would Tony Parker and Manu Ginobili be if they were the number 1 players in the team? They wouldn't be that great. But obviously, I'm not going to poo-poo on their impact, because players don't trip over championships like themselves. But Tim Duncan was the main reason for that, and he did that for such a long time. He came into the league as a top 5 player, won the Finals MVP in 1999. Then he won the Finals again in 2003. Then again in 2005. Then again in 2007. So he never had a back-to-back year, which people will criticize him for, but I think that's kind of nonsense. But then he went 7 years without winning the Finals. He went 6 years without making the Finals. 2013, they made the Finals, and then they lost to LeBron. But then he came back better than ever. Or not better than ever. They were just a very good team. The Spurs were a fantastic team, but Tim Duncan was just a very good player. Not fantastic though. But he had great longevity, and was the best player on a dynasty. There's not much more you can accomplish than being the best player on a dynasty. Speaking of dynasty, at number 6, I have the dynasty, Bill Russell. It's becoming more and more popular that I'm underrating him, and that's pretty cool. I think that Bill Russell at 6 is about as low as you can have him. If you have him any lower than 8, I think you're crazy. If you have him any lower than 6, I start to say, okay, maybe you and I aren't valuing the same things, and maybe out of the things that I value, maybe it seems like that I'm underrating Bill Russell because I value winning, I value defense, I value teamwork, and all the intangibles. But yeah, obviously 11 championships, 5 MVPs, I think 12 All-Star appearances. He had the perfect career, and he was he was the reason that the Celtics were that great. People say, "Oh, look at his teammates." Who were his teammates? I feel like his only teammates besides Bob Cousy and John Havlicek, that were Hall of Famers, without him. No one else really. Sam Jones, great player. I don't think he's an all-time great without Bill Russell. That's my opinion. But he played in the 60s. I don't care. Greatness is relative to your era. But anyway, then we get into the top 5, and I think that this is a pretty universal top 5 at this point. I know that some people like to put in Shaq or Duncan or Kobe, but this is a pretty original top 5, and the order might be different, but I'm very confident with this top 5, and I don't see it changing anytime soon unless any of the new guys come up. But I think the 5th greatest basketball player of all time is the best passer of all time, Magic Johnson. 5-time MVP, 3-time champion, was a 3-time Finals MVP. And people like to criticize him. They think that Steph's better. I think that's nonsense. He's the best passer and the best playmaker of all time. He's someone. He's someone when if he's on the team, they're gonna be contenders. And people want to say, "Oh, he had Kareem." Kareem wasn't Kareem for like that second half of that dynasty, and Magic was still bringing them to the finals. Am I saying those Lakers teams were scrubs? Absolutely not. Would they be like the Showtime Lakers without Magic? Hell no. Magic Johnson, the 5th best basketball player of all time. At number 4, go ahead, call me Homer. It's Larry Bird. Larry Bird is about the most well put together basketball player of all time. I think he's the best non-passing guard of all time. I think he's a better passer than LeBron. I think he's a better passer than Jokic. I think he's the best non-big rebounder of all time. Averages 10 rebounds per game, and he's not a center. I know he's 6'9", but he's a small forward who's spending a lot of his time outside the paint, but still finding a way to grab 10 rebounds a game. And also the best 3-point shooter for his era. A guy who is the best 3-point shooter, the best non-guard passer, the best non-big rebounder. That's insane. Like, people don't understand, to be the best at all 3 while also being a plus on defense. That's one of the most. That's literally LeBron-esque, and this is on top of having the 7th most MVP shares, which is basically just like the percentage of MVP votes you got per year. You add up all those, he's 4th all time. This is with his lack of longevity. Bird would have a GOAT case if it was not for the injuries. If you want to talk about his playoff stinkers, he didn't have out of all the guys in the top 10, he probably had the least amount of help. As great as McHale and Parrish were, they weren't all-time greats. Like MJ had Pippen, who's better than anyone Bird had. LeBron had D Wade, better than anyone Bird had. Kareem and Magic had each other. Kobe had Shaq. Shaq had Kobe. Duncan had the dynasty Spurs. I think that out of the top 10 players, I think Larry Bird had the least amount of help. But at number 3, I got Kareem Abdul-Jabbar. Kareem's an interesting player. I think that he should be the 3rd best player of all time to everyone. I don't think he has an argument for number 2, and I don't think that anybody that's below him has an argument for number 3. 6-time champion, 6-time MVP, 2-time Finals MVP, has the most unstoppable shot of all time, and perhaps the best longevity of all time outside of LeBron. But he was just filthy. So Yeah, there's not much to say about Kareem. I guess the only criticism towards him is that even when he was winning all throughout the 70s, he wasn't not really winning. He was winning all those MVPs, but when he was dominating throughout the 70s, he wasn't really getting many rings. Only has two. Oh, what is it? 2 rings? Oh, was it 2 rings or 1 ring without Magic? I should know that on top of my head, but um, oh yeah, it's just the 1 ring without Magic. So, um, yeah, that is a valid criticism of Kareem. But that being said, when you're part of one of the best dynasties of all time, like you're a 1A, 1B option to Magic, while also dominating that much with that longevity, that's a top 3 career in my opinion. But anyway, we got the GOAT debate. Obviously, you guys know it's between MJ and LeBron. I don't think anybody else has a GOAT case. People are like to argue Kobe. People like to argue Kareem. Some psychopaths are arguing Steph. But I think the GOAT debates is LeBron versus MJ, and it will be for a very long time. But I have LeBron at 2, and I have MJ at 1, and I'm going to group them together because I think that's what it's come down to. Is that when you hear 1 and 2, you think of LeBron and MJ, but in whatever order. But I think that LeBron is slightly worse than MJ, and when I do my rankings, I do value peak over longevity. Longevity is important, and MJ does have some longevity, but obviously he doesn't touch LeBron's. But when I'm talking peak over longevity, I don't think there was ever a point in LeBron's career that he was ever better than MJ. As a matter of fact, I think that MJ probably has about like 3, maybe even 4 seasons, maybe 4 might be pushing it, but probably about like 3 seasons that are better than LeBron's best season yet. So between MJ being the better at his peak, I think that LeBron's floor is also significantly lower. MJ never really had a big time playoff stinker where his team lost because of him. LeBron had that in 2011, and he also kind of had that in 2009 as well, or was it? Wait, no, 2008 actually. 2008. Oh no, I keep my dates wrong. It's actually 2010. It was the series where he basically just 2010. It was the Eastern Conference semifinals when they were the 1 seed, but then he lost to the Celtics in games 5 and 6, and then after that, he joins the Heat, and then completely has a complete meltdown against the Mavs. MJ never really had that. So between MJ's peak and floor being higher, that's why I got him over LeBron. And then also, I know people don't like accolades, but I do. And MJ did accomplish more and won more, had the higher peak, had the higher floor. That's why I think that MJ is the greater player. If you want to talk about LeBron's longevity, that's fine. If you want to value that a little bit more, that's fine too. But if we're talking about the greatest basketball players of all time, we got to talk about them for their body of work. But I think it's most important to talk about who they were at their best. But yeah, so in short, at 1 I got MJ, at 2 I got LeBron, at 3 I got Kareem, at 4 I got Bird, at 5 I got Magic, at 6 I got Bill, at 7 I got Duncan, at 8 I got Shaq, at 9 I got Kobe, at 10 I got Steph, and then I forgot to mention my honorable mentions, but I got Wilt at 11 and Hakeem at 12. So I can almost assure you that this will not be the last time I talk about my all-time rankings. I'm going to get into my top 100 at some point, not tonight, but I'm going to have, once, especially when I have other guests on, we're going to talk about these things. But we got to that because I talked about LeBron's legacy. But the in-season tournament doesn't affect LeBron's legacy at all. And I brought up how there's not much LeBron can do because he's number 2 all time. There's not much he can do to jump to number 1. And I think it's because he was never as good as MJ. And people want to say, oh, if he does this, then maybe he can jump LeBron, MJ. At the end of the day, I don't think there was ever a day that LeBron was ever as good as MJ. So that's why I'm still going to remain stern on MJ being number 1 for a very long time. But yeah, that's all I have for tonight. I said this last time, but I'm hoping this is going to be the last episode I'm going to be recording by myself for a while. Just a couple plugs. You could follow me on Twitter at American Hooper. Follow me on TikTok All American Hooper. On Instagram at All American Hooper with the 2 O's being 2 zeros. Follow my column at primetimesportstalk.com. Just look up my name, Chris Driscoll. And thank you for tuning into another episode of the All American Hoops podcast. This was just as fun as the first time, so I'm really excited to actually have more guests on next time around. But thanks for tuning in, and thank you again for your support. Have a great night, everyone.